All right, let me turn to what will be this year's best performing cities. We're going to be releasing it in just a few weeks. What I'm going to do is compare your region to a number of similar sized regions, principally in the southeast, just to give a comparison basis to see where you're at. So one of those components is 5-year job growth. As David mentioned, if you have one bad year, you're not heavily penalized. You're looking at kind of a moving average performance over the years. And I would say that job growth is still the best yardstick for measuring economic performance across communities. And it's the consistency of job growth over a period of time. And you'll see that in a lot of these measures, Augusta is kind of right in the middle. What I mean by that, the region is right in the middle. This is out of the top 200 largest metros in the country. So obviously if you're at 100, you're right at the median. And over the last 5 years, the region has done slightly better than the national average. Now the good news is that the 1-year job growth from 2010 shows the region doing much better, moving all the way up to 23rd. Now one has to temper this because your region is less sensitive to the business cycle in this recent recession. Also, $1.6 billion in stimulus funds benefited the region in the short term. But nevertheless, the region moved up to 23rd overall in job growth. This shows you wage and salary growth over the 5-year period. So it's not only about the number of jobs, it's about the quality of those jobs that are being created, whether they're high paying or not. And you can see that Huntsville, Austin, Raleigh, right there, consistently there in the top. When you look at 5-year growth averages, they do very well. But when you look at this region, it doesn't do nearly as well in wage and salary growth as it does in job growth. So it's 110 over the recent 5-year period in wage and salary growth, but 87th on job growth. On the 1-year wage and salary growth, the region has performed consistently with job performance, although the ranking isn't quite as high as it was in the 1-year job growth. Now here's something that's troubling for the region. It's no surprise, I would imagine, to a lot of people in the room, but it's important nevertheless to look at it. This looks at job momentum. So we include year-over-year growth in June of this year versus June of last year to get a sense of momentum. And what you find there is the loss of stimulus funds is already manifesting itself, where the region ranks 172nd out of 200 in job growth over that period, and kind of a reverse economic multiplier effect as those stimulus funds drain away and many of the temporary jobs are being removed. Okay, some good news to go along with the bad news. We look at high-tech GDP growth, and the good news is that Augusta in this region overall has been doing very well. Now, keep in mind that it's coming off of a very low base. So if you have 5 jobs and grow to 10, you've doubled. And if you're Austin, you go from 1,000 to 1,200, it's an extra 200 jobs, but not nearly as much in growth. But scientific research services here in the region have been growing fairly dramatically. If you look at the 1-year high-tech growth recently, the region is below kind of the mean, if you will, at 115th. But this gives you an indication of the importance of high-tech economic activity to your region versus the U.S. overall. So if you were at 1 on this measure, it looks at high-tech activity in the region relative to overall within the region compared to the same relationship for the nation overall. You'd be at 1 if you match the national average in terms of concentration of high-tech. And you can see that the area is not quite half as dependent upon technology overall as the nation. So you have a small base, but it has been growing a good bit in recent years. This looks at the industries where there's a higher concentration in high tech than the national average. So there's roughly 23 different industries that are included in the definition of high tech. What it says that your region is concentrated more than the national average in 3 of them. You look at other areas such as Raleigh, Austin, Huntsville, they have a very diverse portfolio of technology concentration across various industries, and that really helps them because they're not as dependent upon one sector or two that may be dependent upon federal funding that could go away at any point, and essentially serves as an insurance pool over the longer term. Overall, the region is going to end up 77th on our rankings when they were released here in a couple of weeks. I mean, on the one hand, it's not a bad performance, but keep in mind that your region tends to be much less cyclical, tied to the business cycle overall, and it's really going to be dependent upon how you do coming out of this recent Great Recession, of what happens in the future. You have a high concentration of healthcare and medical research. All the data shows that when you look at various concentrations. But it's really going to be dependent upon whether or not you can harness more of the assets resident within the region to grow over the long term. What do you need to do that? Well, just a little bit about regionalism. We can talk more about this in the discussion that we have. But given the diversity of your region, the kind of urban-rural dichotomy that exists, it's really important to think about regionalism in that context. It's not a new idea. There's been a lot of academic research in the 60s and 70s and even beyond. But in recent years, there's been a lot more emphasis placed on regionalism, and I think it's well-deserved. So in other words, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. A region can offer advantages in resources, population, education, infrastructure, that one city by itself cannot. So the primary premise of regionalism is the relationships and connections to other places cannot be ignored. You have more resources collectively than you do individually. So the government and its affiliated institutions have a new role to play, I think. Substantial economic and social evolution requires more responsive and proactive participation from regional governments and nonprofit organizations. And passive involvement will place the region behind in the long term. You have to be assertive in looking forward in terms of regionalism and understanding the assets that you have. It's really a key to kind of branding a place and having a common description externally and internally about what you're trying to accomplish to attract new businesses for expansion purposes. And it really is about the art of selling a location. It's more than just selling it. It's selling it externally and making sure that you have a cohesive, consistent perspective on where you see the region headed and how you interact with each other. So a community college, a technical school, maybe in one community, can help collaborate and train workers for an industry that's located somewhere else. And I know you do that already, but that's certainly very important. So it gets involved into the permitting process and ways to really mitigate some of the bureaucracy on business. Now, you have a very good reputation for being business friendly. I don't mean to in any way impugn that, but that's something that is critical in speaking with a unified voice in how you market yourselves externally.